Susan Sontag is one of America's best-known writers, critic, activist, playwright, essayist. She has written a new novel called In America. Inspired by historical events, it tells the story of a group of Polish immigrants who traveled to California in 1876. Led by one of Poland's greatest actresses, the group attempts to establish a utopian commune in search of identity. I am pleased to have Susan Sontag back on this program. Welcome back.
I'm really glad to be back, Charlie. Not just because you pounded the table.
Thank you.
I'll pound the table.
All right. Tell me about this book and how it came about and where did the idea come from and how much of it is based on fact.
Well, there is a real Polish actress.
Right.
She was, in fact, the greatest actress in Poland, and she did, at the age of 35, come to America, decide she was giving up the stage, at least so she announced, and she was going off to America, and with an entourage, with a husband, with a teenage son, 15-year-old son, right, and a bunch of friends, and they ended up in Anaheim, California, 47 acres outside a little village called Anaheim in Southern California. The nearby village of Los Angeles was about 10,000 people. Of course, San Francisco, well, that was very populated up north. Of course, the farm failed. A sort of distant model for them was Brook Farm. They really had in mind something that we would call a commune. And she went back on stage and had a great career here. And the name of this actress, her American stage name was Helena Majeska. And it was the last quarter of the 19th century. So that story, which I discovered purely by chance, I didn't know the story. I discovered it doing one of my favorite things, browsing in a bookstore and opening a book that looked weird and discovering on a page something about this group of Poles who came to Southern California. And I thought, oh, that's my next novel. And the last novel, The Volcano Lever, and this one, I liked having a real story that I could use as a kind of trampoline. Of course, it's completely reinvented, completely changed.
But it's a kind of trampoline to do?
Well, to tell a great story, a story that's very resonant, that suddenly just clicked in my mind, how can I put it, that with this story, the story of the Polish actress who comes to America, ostensibly to shed her old identity and become a completely different person, because that's what America represented to a lot of people. But in fact, she both did and didn't become a new person. She went back on the stage here eventually and had an even greater career. That's a very American story. So it was a way of telling a story about America, a very emblematic story about America. And also, something very dear to me that I've been brooding over for a long time, to write a theater novel, a novel in which the main character was an actor, and a novel about a life in the theater. It really interests me a lot.
Why? I mean, what is it about that interests you?
Well, I love actors. That doesn't sound like
well, you're also
dopey.
Involved with the theater in ways.
Yeah, I've hung out with actors and directors all my life. I've done a tiny bit of acting myself, a little bit of directing, both in the theater and in movies. And I don't know. I think writing fiction has to come, maybe writing in general, but I'm sure about writing fiction, it has to come from a deep place. And I think I spent a big part of my life preparing to write this novel without knowing I was preparing. That is to say, really coming to some kind of real understanding of what actors do and how complicated and strange they are, and then the psychology of actors that really interests me a lot. And this woman, I mean, she's a star. She's not just an actor, she's a star. And there's a certain kind of diva figure that also interests me. I mean, there are people like Sarah Bernhardt or Vanessa Redgrave or Jean Moreau or people like that who are very complicated, very thoughtful people who have some public role to play.
Yeah. Let me just interrupt you, because I am absolutely fascinated, too, about actors.
Actors.
Actors
Good.
Because they come here, and especially in conversation with gifted directors, it used to be said, there are directors that have contempt for actors, and that there are directors who love actors and genuinely appreciate what they bring, and I find that the majority are the latter. I mean, I haven't really met many of those who at least have expressed to me a contempt for actors. Talking about directors now.
I think it's more common among movie directors, don't you think?
Probably,
theater directors.
probably.
Yeah.
But what I do find is this, I mean, that the best directors, they just have this almost undefinable sense of what it is, the magic of the craft that actors bring. You know, and you're interested not just in the craft, but the whole process of the persona as well as the craft, and the idea of spending your life becoming someone else.
Exactly.
You know?
I think I'm very interested, or interested isn't the word, enthralled, absorbed, totally involved, I don't even know what the right word is, in the idea of transformation or self-transformation. And you could say the actor, the actor both represents that idea at its most profound and in some ways at its most superficial, because there is such a thing as acting in the sense, it's also such a complicated idea. Acting, that just means pretending. Right. That is, you're not really transformed at all. One of the oldest debates about acting, it goes back to the 18th century, is does the actor have to feel what he or she is experiencing?
Or does he have to show it?
Or just show it,
right.
Exactly. You know, there's that wonderful old story that I'm sure you know about Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah,
tell me the story.
It's a great story.
And I'll tell you another Olivier story, which is quite good. But go ahead, tell the story.
Well,
about
it's
Dustin.
about
this is when they were making Marathon Man.
When they were making Marathon Man, exactly. And Dustin Hoffman, who is surely a great actor, was preparing in the most elaborate, day after day, week after week, month after month, of entering the character and being the character.
And going without sleep and all this other stuff.
That's right.
So he'd be
and
ready.
Olivier would come on the set, and he wouldn't even know his lines. He wouldn't even know what scene they were shooting that day or whatever. And he'd just look at what he had to do a minute before the camera started rolling, and then he would do something utterly magnificent. And Dustin Hoffman is supposed to have said to him, "But how do you do it? How do you do it? I don't understand how you do it." And he said, my dear boy,
he's right.
Yes, my dear boy, I act, meaning I pretend.
The version of that I know was, have you tried? It was so, the version I heard, which is interesting because it's a popular
I hope
story.
this is a true story.
I do too, because there are versions of it.
It's a great
It
story.
the other version I heard was that he finally, Dustin, and I'd love to ask this to Dustin at some point to find out, but Dustin was so into this sort of being physically feeling and exasperated and his character, who was being tortured. So he was going through the sense of sort of putting himself at a low ebb. And Olivier said, "My dear boy, have you tried acting?"
Right.
Which is the other note. There's also this story that Roddy McDowell tells, I think. Went backstage where Olivier had given an especially, I'm sure you heard this, brilliant performance. Maybe I've forgotten what it was. But it was just extraordinary, even for Othello. I mean, even for Sir Laurence Olivier. It was a brilliant performance. Mm-hmm. And he went back to the dressing room waiting to burst in and say, Larry, you were wonderful. I've never seen anything like it, which apparently he was prepared to do. He opens the door, and Olivier, and maybe adding to this, but this is the way I was told, he's sort of sitting there like this, and he said, "Don't you know how great this was?" And Olivier said, yes, I know, but I don't know how it happened. Mm-hmm. You know? So something had happened that made him that night rise to be bigger, better, which shows you that no matter what, preparation, technique, there's also an element of mystery about.
But don't you think that's true?
You don't agree with that or not?
Oh, I do agree with it, but I think it's not only true of performance, I think it's also true of writing. I'd love to just say writing and not painting or dancing or being a sculptor or being any other art. I think that what I do as a writer, there's certainly a lot of thought that goes into it. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of preparation. There's a lot of consciousness. And yet when it really happens, you feel you're taking down dictation, that you have a sense that something is happening that you don't control, and that's why it's as good as it is. So it's always a mix between an extreme degree of self-consciousness and a surrender to a process that carries you like a wave.
I mean, I've heard stories of people that would just it would just hit them, what you're just talking about, right? And they sat with pen and pencil and just pour it out. I mean, they could not do it fast
I've actually
enough.
had the feeling sometimes that it was actually just coming out of my fingers. Exactly. But, you know, the transformation, that's what actors do. They transform. you could say of somebody who isn't really a good actor, that person doesn't transform, doesn't know how to transform. But there's so many senses of transformation, and what I liked about this story, what must have triggered my own imagination when I came across this story, literally standing in a bookstore in Boston, as it happened, and browsing in a book, which I didn't even buy, but I thought, oh, there's an interesting story. I could make something out of that, was the combination of a novel about America, of immigration to America, and a theater novel, because America is also about transformation. So it's
Is that why it's called In America?
Well, yeah. It suggests that they come to America, that they're just, it's not just, America is the discovery, America is an acquisition, America is an ordeal, America is a liberation. America means so many things to people in the 19th century. I don't mean to say it didn't in the 20th century, it doesn't now. But it always had a mythical character, and it always represented a change. A flight away from something bad, a flight or escape toward some sort of liberation or self-reinvention. I mean, the whole country is, I don't want to generalize about America because everything can be said about America, but the country itself is a project. It's a work in progress. Americans have always understood that our country is a kind of work in progress, and that people who come here accept the possibilities of transformation or innovation or self-reinvention.
Or change.
Or just change.
Something different.
The reasons that people come to America, sometimes it is, of course, for economic advantage, or that rather escaping poverty and misery. But America has represented real ideals for many people. The people in my novel are fairly well-to-do, educated people. They're not coming over in steerage the way my ancestors did come over in steerage, and pretty much around this time, the 1870s, 1880s. These are people who came over because there were people like that, too, in first class. They chose America. They didn't choose it because they were going to have an easier life. In some way, they were going to have a harder life. But it represented some kind of ideal of freedom and self-reinvention. And I'm very addicted, maybe is not too strong a word, to notions of, that I can reinvent myself. I guess it's the most American thing about me. I like
that you
thinking...
can reinvent yourself.
Yeah, I like thinking that my life is not finished, that it's a work in progress.
But I mean, you have been. I mean, everybody. Yours is more of a public recognition of an evolution in terms of it's almost you could write a book called The Evolution of an Intellectual.
Well,
right? It is.
I've changed.
You've changed. You have changed.
I've changed. Yeah, I've changed. I've become a different writer.
Right, you have.
I like that idea. I think, Charlie, this is maybe a rude thing to say, most writers do their best work in the first third or first half of their writing life. It just is a fact.
Most artists do the best work in the first.
I'm not so sure about painters. And certainly not.
I get a lot of people who tell you. Well, I'm not sure about painters either. But I mean, I know a lot of people think that Picasso's best work was the early stuff. Well,
but a lot of painters. I mean, think of Goya.
Matisse did.
I think the late work of many painters and many composers, certainly the great composers, sure, Beethoven, and of course there are examples of writers. Dostoevsky, obviously, his greatest work was toward the end, and so on and so on and so on. But I think mostly writers do their best work early. So I guess I am a little proud of the fact that I actually, maybe presumptuously...
Continue.
No, I go further than that. It's not being too immodest. I think my best work is now. I'm not just continuing. I think
Why?
I think these books are better. I think The Volcano Lover, that novel I wrote in the early 90s, and the new book In America actually is the best stuff I've ever written. I think
Okay,
so.
but what do you think in your mind separates it? Is it the command of language? Is it the command of story? Is it the what?
Well, I think I'm freer. I think my writing is more expressive. I actually don't think I've changed, but I think my access, this doesn't sound too weird, I think my access to myself has changed. I think I was going through a kind of narrow door, and now I'm going through a big, wide gate. I'm able to put a lot more of what I know and feel into my books. I think I was laboring under a lot of inhibitions in the past, and I think, for one thing, I was particularly sitting on a I don't know, a talent or an idea or a skill, or I don't even know what to call it, storytelling, which I didn't even know I was a storyteller. I thought I was some kind of, I use the word intellectual, and I'm not going to, deny that that's what it must look like sociologically, but I certainly never thought of myself that way, but I did think I was a ruminator. I thought I was somebody sort of that liked to chew things over, and that I was a fairly, that my subjects were sort of contemplative. Well, there was whatever activist life I might have out there, but that wasn't me as a writer. As a writer, I thought I was more interested just in the process of consciousness and dramatizing different kinds of feelings people had. As a playwright, as a writer of short fiction and novels, etc. Then with the last two novels, The Volcano Lover and above all this one, In America, I discovered I was a storyteller, that I actually liked to tell stories. This book is actually kind of epic.
All right, but I want to get to that in a minute.
It's got a lot of stories in it, characters, stuff like that.
All the stuff you just said is so wonderful. I mean, what inhibitions do you get rid of? I mean, were these sort of self-censorship and protection, or... And so now you...
Sort of what the hell kind of...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, is it a kind of liberation that from, look, I am who I am and I don't give a damn?
I guess it's something like that. I never think of it that way. I just thought, I felt I could spread my wings. I felt I could even be entertaining. I discovered that certain things I did, that I wrote, it's a very funny thing to describe, that I actually had tears in my eyes when I was writing them. This happened with the last novel, with The Volcano Lover, and then I thought, oh, that's great. I love that. I love that when I read, that I'm really moved, that I think of writing fiction as an education, of reading fiction, rather. I think that the great novels are education of feelings, of your sympathies. They enlarge your sympathies. We're always kind of shriveling and becoming narrower. This is what age does to us. I don't mean age in the sense of old age. I mean just age in the sense of having your life. That you come, if you don't work on it, but there's my idea again, that the self is a project. If you don't work on yourself, you more and more are relying on rote or routine responses to things. You sort of build up your habits and your preferences and your responses. And fiction is like an axe that cuts all through that and kind of splits you open and gives you a model for caring about things that you might not otherwise care about. And I found that capacity in myself.
But I would assume it has to be informed by the kinds of experiences you've had. I mean, just take your trips to Sarajevo.
Yeah, this book, I think, I began this book in '93 in America, and with a couple of months after I began it, I went to Sarajevo for the first time, and there went essentially the next 3 years. And I was in and out of Sarajevo between '93 and '96, and I worked very little on the book. And on In America, I couldn't. There's no way that you're going to write a novel in the middle of this war, and not to mention the fact that there's no glass in the windows, no heat, no running water, no electricity, hardly any food, et cetera, et cetera. No telephone, no mail. I mean, you're totally involved in just sharing that experience and doing whatever you can do there. But it was a deepening experience. I mean, again, though, I think it's what you do with your experiences if you have the energy to work with them and not just be the passive recipient of them. I mean, yeah, I'm sure that those were deepening experiences. But I think the thing I most respect in myself is that I kept on working on myself, really. I kept on working on myself to try to be a better writer. And now I think I have had some kind of breakthrough with these novels, particularly with In America.
Was there a moment when you knew it? I mean, when you began to write, you could feel it? You knew it was different? You knew, as you said, well, the passageway was wider?
Yeah, no, I didn't know it right away. I think I know it about page 100.
When you walked into this bookstore in Boston, and you see this, how many times has that happened to you and you walked out of there saying, I've got my next novel, my next book?
And the next day it's gone.
The next day it's gone.
All the time. All the time. Absolutely. What makes an idea stick? This is fascinating.
Where does it find traction?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it doesn't find real traction until you actually get to work on it and you get to 50, 75 pages. But for me, since, you know, this great thrilling discovery that I love telling stories, I not only like reading them, I like telling them, I guess I have to feel that the story, the given story, like the story of the actress and her friends and her family and her career and coming to America and all that, that there are a lot of stories in the story, so that In America is partly a book about storytelling. And everyone's telling stories and changing stories, and people change their names, as they often did when they came to America. Of course, sometimes they came with these funny names, and then,
and
you know, they were made into short American-sounding names. I want with this book, which takes place in the past, of course, I really want to talk about the present. But it is, I think you can't talk about the past without talking about the present. This book may take place in the late 19th century, but it's not a 19th century novel.
But it speaks to what in the present? Identity, the effort to...
Well, partly the mystery of personality.
Which is a contemporary as well as a...
Sure. The mystery of personality, I would say. Trying to understand all the paradoxes of America, all the completely contradictory things that America has meant to people. The attempt, well, an ethical search, I think, also. This actress, she wants to be a good person. She doesn't want just to be a great actress. So she wants to do good at the same time. Of course, she is very ambitious and totally obsessed by her work on the stage, so much so that in a way, she does sacrifice her private life. It's a choice that was much more common, I think, for women than for men. She does sacrifice her private life to her life on the stage.
How much of you is in her?
I'm in all the main characters.
In all of them?
Yeah, sure. What I like is that they're not me. I really want to tell. I've never been attracted to autobiographical fiction. But I love my characters. They're my best friends. So
they have your ideas and your opinions and your ego and your fantasy and your...
But they have the contradictory things in me. You see, that's the great thing about writing fiction or plays as opposed to writing essays. I'm kind of not so interested in writing essays anymore because with essays I have to make up my mind. And then in the course of writing them, of course, I can change my mind. Then I have to write the essay again. But it has to sort of present a point of view. And always, even in my most self-confident sounding essays, there was always a little voice saying, but, you know, it's also true, something else. Whereas a character, I can put things that I think in the mouth of one character, but I can put completely opposite things in the mouth of another character.
Is any part of you wishes that you had simply earlier focused more on writing novels? More?
All of me wishes that. Don't drop the book, Charlie. Yes, isn't that awful? I wish I was just starting now, but what can I do? That's very American, too.
Yeah, it is. But what you can do is just plow ahead as if that's not a factor.
I'm going to try. I'm going to try. Sure, I did.
You do.
Oh, absolutely. I think...
It's almost like finding the form that's right for you.
That's right. Listen, I came of age as an adult and as a writer in the 1960s. I was a student in the 50s, and I came to New York at the beginning of the 60s. It was a time of enormous public debate, to put it mildly. I'm going to try to take down the usual way in which the 60s is talked about in a very hysterical way and just say it's a time of really, really active debate. I did get caught up in that. And I did think that was a great thing to do, to be part of public debate and influence people about things you cared about. I never wanted to attack things. I wanted to promote the things that I loved. I think my own very evangelical, moralistic, again, very American streak kind of got the better of me. I was sort of interested in plugging the good, the true, and the beautiful, as I understood that to be. Other people might have thought it was a little weird, but I thought it was very mainstream and wholesome. And I got a little stranded. It's almost I didn't understand the ethical power that fiction could have. I understood much better the ethical power that an essay could have. I think that was a kind of mistake that I made. I mean, I don't renounce that work, but I think I sold fiction short in my own mind. And I was too involved in an ethical way in various struggles. I mean, starting with the Vietnam War and this and that and the other. And it took me a long way to get to a better idea of fiction.
I have to leave with that notion. It is that it perhaps, rather than bemoaning the fact that you didn't start earlier, sometimes you have to make the journey to get there. That's right. You know,
well, that's true wisdom. That is true wisdom, to know that the journey is not set and you can do it as you can.
In America, Susan Sontag, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Pleasure. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.